Good evening. There we go. Good evening and welcome to the Church of the Good Samaritan. My name is Elizabeth Farr. I'm the Associate Rector here. And extend welcome also on behalf of Cal Calhoun, the Rector, who is doing a wedding this evening and regrets that he's not able to be with us. Especially excited to have Bishop Brian Cole and Suzanne Craig Robertson here for this conversation. I will turn it over to them very shortly. But as a few points of hospitality, just want to thank you all as you came in for coming in those bell tower doors. We are hosting families with Family Promise here this week. It is actually the first time since the beginning of pandemic that families have returned to being housed within parishes. So we are thrilled that they're here and that it's their home for the week and wanted to respect their dinner and evening time. So thank you for helping us do that. Also, points of hospitality, if you need to use the restroom at any point, if you go out these doors right here and turn to the left, you will see an exit sign with a sign that says restroom, and the restrooms are right through those doors. So again, welcome. We're glad that you're here, and I'm going to turn it over to Bishop Brian Cole.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Again, my name is Brian Cole. I serve as the bishop here in the Diocese of East Tennessee. Grateful for the hospitality of Good Sam. Grateful for Union Avenue Books. Let's applaud them. So I guess several months ago, Union Avenue reached out to us and said, would you like to host this event with Suzanne Craig Robertson? And as I first learned about the book, I called Sarah Shepard, and Sarah endorsed Suzanne Craig Robertson with 2 thumbs up. And I had a chance to read the book. If you've not yet read it, it's an incredible book. Okay. If y'all keep clapping, we're going to be here for a while. So it's an incredible book. So one thing I want to say tonight, that Union Avenue Books are on site. I hope you will buy a copy. If you already have a copy, buy another copy. We want to sell out the books tonight, and also they can take orders and ship them to you. To me, it's just a powerful, powerful book. And so we're going to start. I'm going to introduce Suzanne briefly and then let her do some reading from the opening of the book. And then we're going to go into some conversation. And then my hope is if you have questions, we'll take those as well. But also just thank you for showing up. And thank you for showing up for the topic that's a hard topic. It's a topic that too often we look away from. I want to say in advance, I'm grateful for the Robertson family and your willingness to get to know Cecil. Thank you for doing that. Suzanne Craig Robertson for several years was or still was the editor?
I left there last year.
Okay. Editor of the Tennessee Bar Journal is from... That's right.
Those are all my lawyer and judges who are here.
You can also buy copies of the Tennessee Bar Journal on the back, and we can ship those to you and have those autographed as well. Suzanne, as I began to read the book, I realized you and I have a lot of people in common. Mm-hmm. We have Baptist roots, we have Episcopal connections now, and just so grateful for the way in which you told this story. To me, it's obvious that you're both a really great writer and a careful editor in how you put this story together. And you and Alan make your home in Nashville. There are 2 girls that I learned about through the novel, through the book. And again, just thank you for being here. Thank you for being on this journey with Cecil and being able to tell his story by telling your story. So I'm going to ask you to read from the opening of the book.
Okay. All right. Is that too loud? Am I screaming? It feels loud. I'm going to apologize if you've already read the book because you've heard this part, but this is the prologue of the book, and this explains itself, I guess. This portion right here was written by Cecil. He wrote a memoir that he gave to me that's incorporated in this book, and this is a little piece of that. One by one, my family members stopped coming to see me. A few of them said I embarrassed them, and I haven't seen them anymore. As for my father, I had him removed from my visitation list because I couldn't stand to see him anymore. Nevertheless, I knew that I had to forgive my father for all he had done to my life. That was him. This is me. Except for the extra guards down by the road, all appears normal as I drive up to the prison, winding through serene flower beds and carefully manicured edges, which do their part to hide the tension of the extra high security. The place is on lockdown as it prepares for the execution of a friend of mine. At the top of the grand entrance of Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville, landscaping no longer can conceal its purpose as razor wire and featureless rectangle buildings rise in my view, planted like guards themselves. I see a huge red and white tent dominating the otherwise empty visitors' parking lot. That's new, I think. The blank faces of remote satellite dishes extend skyward from boxy news vans like claws searching for prey. I'm at the prison for the first time without my husband, Alan. In 15 years of visiting Cecil C. Johnson II, this is the first time I have come alone. But today is November 30th, 2009, and Cecil is scheduled to be killed by lethal injection in the early morning of December 2nd, if no court or the governor intervenes. Alan, who works in state government, has an urgent but unrelated meeting with the governor's wife about a building project and will visit Cecil later today. Time is short, and I had decided I better not wait for him. When I first walk up to the processing desk, the guard assumes I'm a lawyer. He starts to check me in, but when he realizes his mistake and that I'm also not family, he tells me I can't go in. I don't mean to cry, it just happens as I tell him about how I am more like family than most of the people related to him by blood. The commotion catches the attention of another guard, whom I'd seen many times out here at Riverbend. She knows my face and vouches for me, but the first guard is unmoved. The friendly guard says, "Wait here," and goes to make my case to the warden. I study the cold government-colored block walls, the plastic bucket seats connected into rows, and the oversized dog-eared ledger where visitors sign in, and I wonder how I'll get word to Cecil if they don't let me see him. After some time, the friendly guard appears around the corner from the warden's office. She's smiling, so I know that she was able to get me approved for the visit. "You can go in until his wife gets here in about 30 minutes, she says. I'm so relieved and grateful that I leap toward her for a hug, forgetting momentarily that she's a prison guard packing heat. She stiffens her back and barks, "Don't do that." "Oh, I'm so sorry," I say, standing up straighter, as if to show I'll do whatever she says. "I switched shifts so I could be here today," she says in a low whisper that I can barely make out. As we walk toward the processing desk, she adds that she has always liked Cecil. She leads me to the metal detector, stamps my hand, and frisks me as I stand without my shoes in a private room. For the first time, I'm less focused on her hands sliding all over my body and more on getting inside the gates. After I put my shoes on, we head out the back door. We walk through a series of now familiar, loud, slow opening and closing gates, surrounded by 14-foot double fences topped by loops of jagged and sharp concertina wire. It's a beautiful day, cold and clear, the heavens a watery blue, an irony against the bleak reason for my visit. I lift my face toward the sky and wonder if Cecil will get to see such a sight again. At the next building, we're buzzed in through a heavy door, and I hold up my hand under a black light for that guard to see my purple glowing hand stamp, which is even more important on the way out. I take the turn inside the first building, as I always have, but my guard catches my elbow and leads me a different way than toward Unit 2, Death Row, and I don't understand at first. She's pointing me toward the vending machines of the main building's visiting room, where over the years we'd spent lots of dollars getting chili cheese Fritos, pecan pie, popcorn, and microwave barbecue sandwiches to take into Unit 2. As we get closer, she veers to the right, and I feel the first of many waves of nausea as I realize there's a door next to the drink machine that I'd never noticed. The death chamber is behind the snacks. We continue past to another series of buzzing doors. I sign my name in what seems more like a guest book at a bed and breakfast rather than a log on death row. I suppress the urge to write a comment there like, "Had a great stay," or "Best killing facility this side of the Mississippi, good job." Then I am led to a tiny room that has a waist-high glass window embedded with a crisscross of wires on one wall. Through the window is another similar room about the size of a wide closet. Cecil is not there yet. The guard has left me, and I try sitting in one of the plastic chairs like you might have on your patio for a picnic, but that leaves me nose high to the glass, so I stand. Shifting from one foot to the other, I suddenly feel awkward to be here and wonder what we're going to talk about. But I hear him before I see him. All these years, because of his good behavior, we have visited Cecil in an open room where we could play cards, eat together, laugh, and forget where we all were for a while. Today, I can't see his feet, but I can hear them. The chains so thick you might use them to pull a car out of a ditch with a tractor, are clamped on his ankles and drag on the hard floor. He's wearing an awkward white tunic and is barefoot. He tells me later that they have taken his clothes and shoes and that his feet are cold. He backs into the little room through the glass, not looking at me, while the guard closes and locks the door. Cecil puts his shackled wrist through a narrow opening in the door, like a mail slot, while the guard unlocks the chains and pulls them off. Each link clanks on the metal door that slithers through. He turns slowly toward me, and I catch my breath. He looks like a preacher in a baptistry in that white tunic. Cecil spreads his arms wide and places his hands on the lower frame of the window, outstretched. My mind flies back to the many baptisms I've witnessed, where the pastor stands waist-high in water, looking down onto the congregation with reassurance. There, the water laps happily onto the glass-fronted pool, and it goes something like this. What is your profession of faith? Jesus is my Lord and Savior. I baptize you, my brother in Christ, in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. When Cecil speaks, I'm jolted from that safe space of resurrection waters back to this death chamber reception room. I don't know what they think I'm going to do, he says, nodding toward the door with a slot. He puts his hand up on the glass toward me. I put mine up to his on my side of the glass. I'm sobbing now and can't breathe. For years now, Cecil has referred to me as his little sister. Although he has many biological siblings, he told us that he felt that God had sent our family because he didn't hear from most of his own family much anymore. For the record, that's a little bit of pressure to be enough to fill that role. I can take my daughter crying and my wife crying, he whispers, just loud enough so I can hear him through the glass. That just makes me stronger for them, but not you. He's crying now too. It's the first time I have ever seen him cry in 15 years. Rivulets of tears make shiny streaks on his dark cheeks. He tells me how the guards are recording everything he says and does. He's hopeful that a stay of execution will come from the Supreme Court, Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, or even the governor. He recounts the football game from the day before when it looked as if our hometown Tennessee Titans were going to lose, but they pull it out, beating the Arizona Cardinals with 6 seconds to go. Commentators called it a legendary comeback. Cecil describes that last play in detail to me with a hopeful smile, comparing his situation to that one. Only the fanatical faithful believed the Titans would come out on top, down at the wire, and he's got the same against all odds faith today for himself. I'm not as hopeful as he is, and I don't understand football anyway. I keep both of those thoughts to myself. He tells me how much he loves his daughter, his grandkids, his wife Sarah, our family, and Jesus, how he isn't worried because of the promise of heaven, how either way he'll be okay. I had thought these 30 minutes would never end, but the moments flew by. When our time is up, we both say, "See you tomorrow." The guard escorts me out. As I pass by the snack machines, I see Sarah being escorted in. We stop for a tight hug, but because time is short and she's anxious to see Cecil, she rushes toward the door. The guard walks me back into the bright sunshine where I'm free to go where I please. I skirt past that massive media encampment in the parking lot. Circus tent, I think absently as I rush to the safety of my car, pushing down the nausea where I sit, stunned. How did it come to this? I never even meant to get involved.
Thank you. So the story that you tell, you take us across time throughout the story, and I'm curious at what point in this encounter with Cecil and your family, so when did you decide I'm going to write a book, and then how long did that take?
You jumped right to the end. Okay. It was probably a couple years after he died that I thought about doing that. Right after he died, I didn't think about writing about it. And then right after he died, we were kind of what we've learned recently was we were traumatized. I mean, so we didn't really, I didn't want to write about it. I didn't want to do any of that. He had given me his memoir a few years before that, like I mentioned, and had wanted me to get it published. And I did not know how to do that, or I didn't think it, I don't know, but I just couldn't deal with it. And so I didn't. And then it was a couple years later, I was in a class learning how to do a nonfiction book proposal, and you had to have an example. And I said, well, I don't really have anything, that I'm just grew up with a really basic, good childhood in suburbia, right? And so I don't know what I would write about. And then the person who was doing the class, who knew me, said, didn't y'all used to visit someone on death row? So I did it kind of as an experiment, and then I was like, oh, this might actually work. So, and how long it took was a really long time. So it took about 10 years probably, and or so. And if you're a writer in this group, you might not think that's super long, because it just takes a long time. You have a life, you've got soccer and horse shows and stuff like that, and so it just took a long time. And also, as a writer, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, just when you sit down to write something, you have got to immerse yourself into that world for a little while. And it was hard to do. It was hard to sit down and work on it. So I drug it out a long time.
So I'm aware in the novel that, I keep saying the novel, because it reads like a novel.
Thank you, though. That's a compliment.
So I'm aware that in the story, when the story begins, Alan is going to visit Cecil. And at some point, you begin to get phone calls. And so I'm with you. You're visiting, Alan's visiting. When you decide to bring the girls to see him, I'm aware, even as a reader, I'm thinking, wow, this family is really all in with Cecil.
Or did they not think that through?
Well, and so yeah, I'm going to let you. So I'm just curious, and then I'm also curious to what degree would your girls, now young women, say, like, how did this impact and change their life?
Right. Well, it's a little backwards from that, because Alan went for quite a while, and we had signed up through our church some men who run I'm not sure what it is. They still do it. Like, they were looking for people to be friends to people on death row. And so they presented at our church, and it was very compelling. And we left, we're walking to our car, and I was like, whoa, that is a lot. I hope somebody does that, because that is not for me. And Alan's like, well, I signed up, so. And I was like, what? And so that was his thing. And so then Cecil would call on Thursdays. Alan set up meetings on every Friday for a long time. He went every Friday. And so Cecil would call on Thursday just to make sure he was coming, so that he could know how to plan. And so I would usually answer the phone, and Grace, our daughter, who was 4 at the time, started talking to him on the phone as well. And so the order of events was that Anne Grace went a good long while before I went to the prison. That is a dirty parental secret, that I sent her to death row with Alan, and I wouldn't go. But happy ending for them. But so they are now, we have 2 daughters, and they are 32 and 26 now. And we had Allie, our second daughter, a couple years after we had started visiting Cecil. And so I asked Allie just a couple weeks ago that same question, and I did interview them for this book, but I was just like, do you wish that we hadn't done that? Do you wish that we hadn't put you in that position? And she kind of laughed, and she said, well, I thought everybody did that. And she said, I didn't know any other way. And so, and then Anne Grace, our older daughter, she got her degree in social work, 2 degrees in social work, and I'm just sure that is very connected to this experience. And when we look back on this, and we've talked a lot about it since the book, just did we think that through? Did we think, will this make them more compassionate? Let's do this as a family project. We did not. So we kind of back-ended into it. There's a part in the book wherein Grace does talk about that, and it hit her harder than any of us. Probably she knew him from age 4 to 19, and so it was harder on her when he died. But anyway, I think they don't hold us. They're not mad about it, I guess. I think they feel okay about it.
Because in the story, on the night that he's executed, she's in college. Is it at UT?
Uh-huh.
And to me, that was a very hard scene for lots of reasons. And to think about this young woman so connected to him, can't be there, is really struggling in a way that, again, is probably impacted and changed her sense of vocation and call and all of that.
Right.
You mentioned in the book, so a place like Good Sam does incredible outreach throughout the community, involved in all kinds of things. Tonight are helping house families that need housing. So you mentioned in the book that often, as persons of faith, if we're involved in caring or helping ministry, people really say, well, that's so great that you're feeding the hungry or that you're helping with housing. But when you mention, I'm seeing someone on death row, that doesn't always get the same kind of accolades. So I'm curious, are again, just the ways in which people have approached you or responded to you once they knew your family had this connection to a death row inmate?
We did not talk about it a lot for a long time. I mean, our families knew, our close friends, but it wasn't something that we put out there. And I guess we were Southern Baptists at the time. That has something to do with that. At church, it was, I don't know how that, Alan.
Because Suzanne and I have said this before, it's kind of like, for years it's been sort of our own secret. It's not something you talk about publicly. And when we do, or we've had situations where that arises, and I'm not going to steal the show, I'm going to hand this back. But, right out of their mouth would be, you're visiting someone on death row.
What did he do?
What did he do? And all of that aside, and the politics, and whether you believe in the execution or not, it simply was a faith-based relationship of visiting somebody on death row. And so that's kind of where we started with it and kept it. So, it was for years sort of a secret.
So that's where it starts. But as the story unfolds, to me, it's not just you and Cecil. It becomes you and Cecil in society, race, racism, privilege. And you begin to also, as the story unfolds, to begin to wonder about what happened and realizing some real concerns for you as far as the case, the strength of the case. Mm-hmm. I've just asked you like 27 questions. So
all my lawyer friends here, I did not make any judgments on on how those particular things went, but because I'm not a lawyer. What was the first? You did cover a lot of ground.
So I think at one point, to me, so on the one level, this is a story of one human encountering another human in need. At some point, I think just because of who you are, and you begin to understand there's a dynamic around race and privilege and who is or who isn't on death row. And I'm just curious how that impacted you in that moment then, and does it continue to impact how you think about how Suzanne navigates the world and church and all of that?
Yes. No, just this.
Yeah.
That it does. When I read his memoir, which we had already known him a really long time by then, I was stunned. I mean, we've had talked to him so many times, and but he didn't talk about his childhood or what happened the night that he turned himself in. You know, that whole thing, he followed that through, but especially his childhood. And I just sat there reading that and just, how did I not know this about you? How did I not know that your mother yelled at you and said, "I hate you," and stormed out the door, and that your father held your hand to the stove as a punishment, and and really had the best childhood. And so I just that shocked me even after all those years. And then skipping forward, after I wrote a couple of drafts of this book, I hired a developmental editor who worked with me, and one thing that she really focused on was that, and she put little questions in the side, like, gosh, why do you think, in answer to one of the parts of the book is, about the rule of law, it's the best thing we have, I'm so glad we have it, but did it go awry? It seems like it. But she and the court said this, and the jury said, and she made a note, and she said, and the First Lady also had kind of come to the same conclusion in talking to Alan, and the note from the editor was, I wonder why a white middle-class woman would feel like it had gone okay, like that it was, and you could trust that, and why maybe it didn't feel that way to Cecil, and it certainly didn't end up that way. But so I really started noticing my own privilege during that time, and just,
Also in the book, and this often does come up, as someone who then is visiting a person on death row, at some point you get responses from folks who are asking about the victims of the folks connected with that crime, and then ask you, have you visited those folk? And you mentioned that sort of tension and turmoil of sort of putting that on you as well. So I'm curious how that hits you then, and are there ways in which you continue to have that sense of what it means to have that connection with the death row inmate without necessarily knowing the victims?
Right. That, the hardest question. I think that's come up a little bit a few times, and how can you reconcile that? And then have you even talked to them? There were, in this crime, there were 3 people who died, and so there were families just torn apart by this, and anyway, so we had to really think about that. A couple things. One is just, it just feels like this is where we were set down. This is the spot we landed, like we didn't look into it. And also, when we signed up for this ministry, one thing that they told everyone was, don't try to know about the crime. Don't try to get involved in that. So did not follow that rule, but I did for a long time. But so that you can just be with the person and not worry about any of that. So that's what we did for a long time. We didn't know what the crime was for a really long time. And then by the time that we did know, which was close to when he was executed, and close to when somebody wrote me a letter to ask me that, or demand that, it felt like, we already loved him. It felt like we hoped and surely there were other people to reach out to them. And by that time, we were so close to Cecil, I didn't really feel like it would help them that much to hear from us, because we were, with him. But anyway, that's...
So if folks haven't read the book yet, I think one thing I really want to just applaud you on is the way in which you do take his story, his memoir, and really, while there are moments where you're talking about you or Alan or your girls, just Cecil is the main character in this book. And again, I think so often when we think about privilege, the privilege to say, I can write a book and get it published. I'm just grateful that you took that and decided, I'm going to shine a light on this man. And because I think a lesser kind of writer, I think it would have been possible for Cecil to become a minor character.
I hope it feels like that. I've also struggled with, will it be perceived as a white savior type of thing, you know? And I don't have an answer for that, except we didn't save him, so no. But I hope he does come through, mostly.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, I think Dietrich Bonhoeffer talks about, you know, obviously if we're going to get involved in any of the pains of the world, we're going to be so complicated and so many pieces that aren't going to make sense, but you're still going to go in there and get your hands dirty. And so I think in that regard, you know, just to keep a promise to say, I want to help tell the story about this man, I'm just really grateful for that.
One of the things I was going to say too about the victims' families, as we've thought this through, I have thought, you know, if somebody had come to us and said, we've got a family of a 12-year-old who was killed, and family of 2 innocent bystanders who were killed, and then we have this man who's convicted of these murders, and we need you to pick one of these to go, you know, be there for. We would not have picked the murderer. I just know that, you know, so I do feel like it was, well, Alan thrust it upon us, but it was, you know, I can totally understand that sentiment.
Are there questions in the audience that folks want to ask of Suzanne about the book or the project? I'm going to take a mic to you.
Well, let me thank you very much for the book itself.
Thank you.
I've treated it much as the prayer book enjoins us to treat Scripture. I have read, I have marked, I have learned, and I have inwardly digested this book. So I urge you to do the same, dear friends. I've been moved to tears with this book. I am left, however, with 3 puzzlements that I'd like to address to you.
Okay.
And I don't think they are spoiler alerts, but they would help me to see how you deal with them. As I read this book, I saw it as an account of a black man's failure to get justice at the hands of a white legal system. Not until the end did I discover that the judge who presided over that unjust verdict was black.
Right.
You introduced us to a man named Sterling Gray,
Right.
a judge who was so corrupt, he wound up killing himself and his wife. I assumed he was white too. Not until the end did I discover that he was black as well. So my puzzlement is, why didn't that fact come out earlier? My reading the book would have been very different had I known a black judge presided over that whole system, that a corrupt judge like Sterling Gray was black. Mm-hmm. That is a puzzlement. Second, you briefly mentioned that Cecil Johnson was in prison in 1995 and that he killed a man while he was in prison. You didn't follow up on that, maybe for good reason, but that too was a puzzlement to me.
Are you an editor? You'd be good at it.
I'm sorry?
You would be a good editor.
Oh, good.
Those are good questions. Where were you?
So, again, my question, in sum, it would have helped me to know earlier that Cecil Johnson was the victim of black injustice. Why did you elect not to make that evident?
I didn't call them white either. I think if maybe we assumed that they're white, but I don't have an answer for that, I guess.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hey,
What
Buck.
I'm curious about, you've been around the law and dealt with 14,000 lawyers for a lot of years. But I want to know what surprised you the most from this experience. What surprised you?
Of writing the book or of just knowing? I think it surprised us that we ended up being such friends with him. It surprised us, and this seems so dumb now, but it surprised us when he was actually executed. We really thought right till the end that wouldn't happen. So, but again, I look back and I see my own privilege. Well, that can't happen. That doesn't seem right. And at that time, I hadn't even read the trial transcript. Like, I didn't really know. I just had we felt that way because we loved him. And so I didn't have any reason to think that. But I would say that the grinding of the system, that there was just no going back on once that first trial had that outcome. There's just, even with 27 years of pro bono representation from some awesome lawyers for him, it just, just couldn't come back from it.
Other questions? Hold up, Sylvia, let's make sure you, and then you.
I have a comment about the race situation. As a black woman, almost 85 years old, we've become assimilated and tainted. That's the nature of racism. Racism, just because I'm black, doesn't mean that I'm not racist. And people hate it when I say that. But it's the truth. It is the real truth. And one of the things that I'm still striving to do is to be able to get us to talk to each other. That is the only thing that's going to save us, is that we have to face each other, because racism is so insidious and such a terrible thing that it has made us all ill.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Douglas P. Nanny. Thank you for being here. I'm curious, and I haven't read the book yet. Was this the first death row prisoner that you had visited? Had you visited other, maybe not death row prisoners, but just other prisoners? And also, have you visited any since then? Thank you.
Good question. No, I had no experience. None of us had any, I don't guess you had, any experience with visiting anybody. We really just kind of went by the guidelines of the group where we signed up. And we haven't done it anymore. We were at our church a few weeks ago, and somebody asked a similar question, asked Alan if we would do it again. And I've heard him from the get-go say no, he wouldn't. It was very traumatic. But a few weeks ago, he said he would. So I can't wait to see that. I mean, but it was, it's a lot to do. So maybe he will.
One of the things one of the things when we did visit on death row, it's not a large, but there's a waiting room, and so we got to know other death row inmates and their families, and see some of those that were on death row get exonerated. Or is that the right word? I'm not a legal.
One of them was, but one of them just got moved to life. Oh, but Nadumi, he got out. Yeah,
Nadumi did get completely exonerated.
Right.
And of course, with Cecil, there was no DNA testing back then, so it was a lineup, and you'll see that in the book. Which one of these, and this guy, and there were complete faulty issues surrounding even that. But yeah. My answer to the church, at our church, St. Paul's, was I thought long and hard about it when he asked the question.
Not necessarily.
And I thought, I would. I mean, because we've got so much privilege that and they don't have that. And at least a visitation is the least that I can do. So, you know, to what extreme does that go to, where you pour yourself and your life and your family into a situation? It may be something different, but it does take a toll. And I think Suzanne said it right. We retreated after the execution, just to go into hiding to some degree and recover.
Thank you for being here. We haven't read your book yet, but it sounds fascinating.
Thank you.
I'm really looking forward to it. I was wondering if the church that got you into this provided any support for you, either through support groups or through any counseling, for you to handle all the emotional experience that you had, and to be able to get some guidance if needed. Or if they didn't, would you recommend that for someone who is
That's
in
a
your position?
good idea. That the church that we were with at that time, it was Baptist, very progressive Baptist, and then there wasn't a formal thing like that, but there was a lot of support because we'd all seen the same program, and several other people signed up. I think one or two other people went to death row for a while. And so it was a like-minded group of, so with those people, we did feel that support. Then we were at another church that I referred to earlier that did not feel like we should bring it up. So, but we're Episcopalian now, so we're talking about it.
So if there and there, but also let me just say about your question. So a couple years ago, before COVID, I had a chance to visit death row in Nashville. Abu Ali, who is now on not on death row, he's life sentence. While on death row, became an Episcopalian, and so Bishop John Bowerschmidt, myself, and Timothy Kimbrough, who's the dean of the cathedral in Nashville, they arranged for us all to go see him, and this was probably 2018, 2019. I think it's a similar sort of space, the way you're describing the space. So once we were actually in the space, it was like kind of just a big open rec room. Mm-hmm. And so in my mind, I'm driving to Nashville to meet one death row inmate, and I'm going to meet him with John and Timothy. By the time we're actually there, we're around this big table. It's John, Timothy, and Brian, and Abu Ali, and then two other death row inmates. So there are now 6 men having a conversation. I can't go anywhere without someone asking me if I know Charles Fells. So at some point, one of the inmates said, "Do you know Charles Fells?" I had breakfast with him this morning. That's what I said. That's what I actually said, which was true. And so all of a sudden, it's like it was a really strange day. Which on the one hand, it had just every sort of, tell Charles I said hey, which is such an East Tennessee thing. Tell Charles I said hey. At the end of it, we shared the Eucharist together, and definitely for me would be the most powerful experience of sharing the Eucharist. Right, to share the Eucharist on death row, 3 men on death row, 3 men who have supposedly given their life to the gospel. All of us in some way have given something away. It was powerful and it was sobering, and I think it would be important for anyone to make those sorts of visits to think about how you have support when you do that. And I'm also aware so often when I was a parish priest in Asheville, North Carolina, and would visit folks on the street in prisons and jails, too often something happens in prisons and jails that sort of really can dehumanize all of us. And we've got to find a way to redeem that, because ultimately everyone sort of loses their soul there.
While you're doing that, I was going to say, when we first started visiting, and Alan had been there a year or so before I got there, and we walked into that room, and they're all like, "Hey, Alan, hey," and I'm like, "What is happening?" And because I guess people had same time visitations, and so he knew a lot of them.
Okay, you mentioned that you didn't want to come across as the savior in this relationship. The friendships are two-way streets. And I'm having a hard time imagining what kind of conversations and interactions you had that would allow both of you to benefit equally or close.
Cecil and
Yes.
us.
Yeah, I would be at a loss of words.
Well, yes, you're correct. I do. I think I say this at some point, but when we. I was going to say, we had 30 minutes on the phone when he would call, and it was just me. And so, what do you talk about? And it wasn't long till we were able to talk about cooking. He was a cook on death row, and which my friends have laughed because I'm no cook, and so I'm not saying I got tips from him, but it wasn't like we had. I didn't have a lot to add to that conversation, but. And then at that time, he had learned about poetry, and he was writing a lot of poetry, and he would talk about his poems, and he sent us a lot of poems, but, and I'm not a poet either, but, so I guess I learned some from that, and I felt like during some of that time, we were just chatting about that sort of thing, and it was kind of easy sometimes to forget where he was, because he was just, and we talked about his daughter.
I think we're back. So Carol and then Charles, and we might be out of time.
Yes, I was just imagining what it was like after he died, what you went through, and how long it took you to recover from that. Do you feel you got any closure, or your family got any closure to rewriting the book that helped?
Closure. Yeah, probably, and that did take a while. Every time I think of that question, though, I think we're kind of tertiary to him. Like, he had a daughter, and he has a brother who he was close to, and so what must they be feeling? Like their lifelong bonds to him much deeper than ours, and his whole family did not support him throughout all that, but he did have his daughter and his brother, and so maybe closure. I don't cry every time I talk about it anymore, and it was even after 10 years. Like when Alan read the draft, he was just. I had to apologize so many times for making him cry, but it was hard to relive. I guess like any hard story like that, but it's getting better.
We're going to do one more question, and then want to have a chance for you to be able to purchase books and for you to be able to sign books. So, Charles.
Suzanne and Alan, I'm here tonight to bear witness to the truth of the story that you have told. I am all too familiar with death row. I was asked to visit and represent Terry Lynn King, who is still alive, and then Don Johnson, who was executed in the same death chamber that Cecil was executed in, but 13 years later. I know the truth of death row as you do and as your family does. And what I say to those who have not read this book, it is absolutely faithful to the experience of the execution machine that we as Tennesseans support in Nashville. And so as people of faith, this book is worthy of all of us to read and to embrace. And what I say to you and Alan and your girls and all your family is quite simply this. Because of you, Cecil's death is not in vain.
Thank you.
Because of you, we will remember him as well as you with gratitude, love, and tears.
Thank you. That was my goal, I think. Thank you.
That could definitely stand as the last word, but do you want to say anything else?
Oh, yikes. I should have saved something. I feel like I blurted it all out already. No, I just appreciate y'all being here, and for you to have my book all marked up and all the things that are in there. If y'all are writers and you see that, something you've written, I was just like, look, he has sticky notes all in my book. And so I appreciate that so much. But
Thank you again. Alan, thank you. When you talk to your two daughters, tell them we're grateful to know about their story
I will.
and how they're living in the world. Thank you all for being here tonight. Please go buy all the books, and you'll go back and sign some books.
okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you all.